Welcome everybody to this wonderful webinar by our esteemed executive member, Dr. Angelina Maphula. My name is Fatima Peters. I'll be hosting the webinar for today. Our executive member, Dr. Maphula, will be presenting on qualitative sampling. Do you know how? The webinar is organized around the following themes. What is qualitative sampling? Understanding non-probability sampling, types of non-probability sampling, data saturation and sample size, inclusion and exclusion criteria when in the research process to decide about sampling. I'd like to read through her biography for you. She is a qualified clinical psychologist employed at the University of Venda, a postdoctoral fellow at the University of California in Los Angeles, UCLA, and the South African Trauma Research and Training Program. Her research interests include trauma, HIV and AIDS, mental health, gender-based violence, substances, and child development. She is currently involved in various research projects: the GLAD Africa Epilepsy Project, Study 8, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on people with HIV, a multi-countries collaboration. She served as a co-investigator and supervisor for the MAL-Aid project and VIMBE project, where the focus was on child development and neuropsychological assessments. Dr. Maphula also supervises postgraduate students and is immersed in community engagement. She contributes to the community by presenting on the local radio about psychologically related topics that are accessible, empowering, and informative. Welcome, Dr. Maphula, to this wonderful presentation, and thank you so much for availing yourself. You may go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Peters. I will quickly be sharing my screen. Welcome to this wonderful webinar arranged by SAISA DRM. Ms. Peters has alluded, we will, at the end of this webinar, I believe that we would know what is qualitative sampling, understand better the non-probability sampling, also know, the types and how this data saturation works and sample size. Will also engage in inclusion and exclusion criteria, and also know when in research process to decide about sampling. I would like to also ask that we engage. If you hear something that you feel that it's useful, please do send away your little hearts that you have in your functionality there, because this is a very digitalized world. Now, just before I get to engage into my content, I would like to maybe go through lessons that I've learned over the years as I do research. I feel that it is important that before we even talk about sampling, one must know what their research is all about in terms of the purpose and the objective, because those two will guide your research study, and it will guide who should be your sample. And the second thing that is very critical is, in as much as we would like to sample participants, one would need to know the latest research linked to their area of interest, specifically talking into their research topic, because you want to make sure that you are bringing a gap in your research and you are filling that gap as you conduct your study. And I think for those of you who are students, I don't know who are our attendees, please, in your chat box, can you just indicate if you're a postdoctoral student, if you're a PhD student, if you're a master's or honors student, so we know our cohort that is in the call. As I'm saying that, you would want to be on the same page with your promoter and your supervisor or your supervisor. This is important because they should be a continuous engagement in terms of what your study is all about. So it's important to always engage with your supervisor. That is why some of you would say, my supervisor has told me 10 times, saying I must change this and that. And I think overall, it's read and write and read and write. You read some more, you write some more, you read some more until your research is done. Now, diving into what is meant by qualitative sampling. I would like to indicate that when we do qualitative sampling, we begin with qualitative research, which unpacks the the complex descriptions of people's experiences. It also unpacks, the human side of an issue linked to behaviors, linked to beliefs, opinions, emotions, relationships. And this is one type of research that also identifies intangible factors like your social norms, things that we don't normally talk about, socioeconomic status, gender roles, ethnicity, religion, and etc. And those information that comes up through qualitative research may not readily be apparent or readily be available. So research would actually just ground that up so people are able to interpret and better understand those complex realities. Now, qualitative sampling, therefore, involves understanding concepts, opinions, experiences from a subset that is, we would refer as a population for a given study. So it would dive into when you go to your population and then you sample subset individuals or objects or whatever that you would need as your population. Now, when we continue, we'll talk into understanding non-probability sampling. We must also know that in a sample where we are saying non-probability sampling, this is where it is not possible to specify the probability that any person or unit will be included. That means it's not a given, it's not obvious, because there are specifics that needs to be considered when you sample your population for a qualitative sampling. So non-probability sampling would involve where there are no specific given guarantees that a person would be selected, because some criteria are used to select such a person. The advantage in non-probability sampling is that it enables researchers to reach the difficult to reach members in the population. So those samples that you would not normally reach are reachable when you're using non-probability sampling, because remember that you would dive into getting to specifics. If, for example, you want people who have had cancer, maybe for 10 years, that would mean that you're going to a cancer, but you're not only getting patients who have just enrolled as cancer patients, but you also look into have they been on treatment for 10 years. So that goes into identifying those that are difficult to find, or those who would be difficult to be identified for a specific subject or a specific issue or on the table. So the advantage, hence, it's you are able to reach such difficult populations, and with specifics again. Now, the limitation in it, as many research books would allude to, would be the difficulty in making inferences, because remember that with qualitative research, we don't strive to have a representative sample. We actually want to go in depth and understand a phenomena. So it's not about generalizing our findings. It's about understanding a phenomena that one is researching about. So now the limitation thereof is that one is not able to generalize findings into the general population, but they will be able to get to understand in depth and be able to understand that complex phenomena that would be difficult just to be explored. So the limitation thereof is just of not being able to make an inference. As we move along to the types, there are 4 main types that have been indicated across all other literatures and research books and journal articles. And of those 4, we speak about purposive, we speak about convenience, we speak about quota sampling, and snowballing. So now the first one that I would like to unpack is purposive sampling. The reason why I've put it first is because it's very famous and people love to use purposive sampling for many reasons. Now, purposive sampling speaks to a form of non-probability sampling in which researchers would basically rely on their own judgment, to choose members of the population to participate. So the researcher pre-select criteria, a particular criteria that is relevant for a particular question. So like, for example, where you find that the researcher wants to explore maybe experiences of women who are HIV positive. So the researcher will pick those who are HIV positive and they're women, because that is the sample that this person is looking to answer some research questions. And obviously with purposive sampling, researchers purposively would handpick individuals from the population that appears to them to be representative of, based on their researchers' knowledge and judgment. And that links up to the research question at hand. So depending on what the researcher would want to ask about or what their research question is all about, then they determine who qualifies according to that criteria. The advantages with purposive sampling, it provides in-depth and detailed information about the phenomena under investigation. So when the researcher goes and finds those specific individuals who are HIV positive, you find that they get the relevant information and they're able to come up with in-depth understanding of that phenomena under investigation. Now, the limitation of purposive sampling is that, it is prone to researchers' bias by the fact that researchers are supposed to make their own judgment, subjective judgment. So when choosing such participants, there is there is a room where the researcher could apply bias due to the fact that they are making their own subjective judgments. That is one limitation that is that cuts across, research within research books. Now, one thing that is also important when we talk about sampling, specific to purposive sampling, there are subtypes or forms that are under purposive sampling. I will go through each of them just to unpack them for you to understand. When we talk about purposive sampling, it has subtypes or forms that falls under it. The first one is maximum variation sampling. And this one, it's basically known as heterogeneous sampling, where you find that the researcher would use this type of sampling to capture a wide range of perspective relating to a subject that the researcher is interested in. But at the same time, they use this wide variation, where we could talk about an example where it's all leaders that are being interviewed, but you find that the researcher decides they want to understand it from an official from the government, maybe an official from a national government, an official maybe from provincial and local non-governmental institutions. So there is maximum variation, but although it speaks to the same subject, but there is variation. In those instances, you find that the researcher might not even be able to just say, I will take such individuals who are leaders and their age between this and that, or females or males. They just generalize to say because they want maximum variation in order to understand the whole concept. The second one is what we call homogeneous sampling. Now, this is opposite of what I just said, where you find that the process then involves selecting a small homogeneous group of subjects or units where they share similar characteristics. It could be, for example, an EMS personnel, but the researcher might specify and say, even though it's within the EMS personnel, I want those who have gone out and engaged in the past 3 months, and they had to deal with maybe a scene, an accident scene where people died. So that is specific. It's very homogeneous, even though it's everybody is in the EMS personnel. It's a group of EMS personnel, but there are special characteristics where the researcher now ties it in to say, I would only want to consider those who have had an experience where they went out to an accident scene, they dealt with, people who then died as a result of that accident. So this is a homogeneous sampling where you want the characteristics to be very common, like similar characteristics. Even it goes to, sometimes you find that a researcher would decide the ages must be, between 20 and 25 because you want to keep it in the same age group. It could be that the researcher would decide, oh, I want those who have experience, maybe who have been in the field for 2 years. So anyone who has been hired recently would not qualify. So that is trying to bring it in to make sure that your sample is very homogeneous, and we call that homogeneous sampling. And the third type goes to a typical case sampling. This is useful where you find that the researcher then wants a typical. So if it's maybe, for example, it's say maybe it's in a village, they want to find an average income. So they would go, if it's a part of a village, they would go into communities that share the same characteristics so that they can be able to identify a typical case. And sometimes, it's a strategy where you find that the sample will be representative of that group, and hence it's a typical case. The fourth one is extreme or deviant sampling, case sampling. This is where you find that the researcher would like to learn from highly unusual manifestation of phenomena of interest, such as outstanding successes, notable failures, top of the class, dropouts, crisis, and such. It's obtained from an unusual case. And an example would be a researcher, a psychology researcher who would want to go and maybe interview men who have killed their kids and wives. So that is specific. It's outstanding, something that is a bit out of what we would normally do. So those are called extreme or deviant case sampling. And the other one is critical case sampling, and this is more applicable for the high care units in hospitals where maybe nurses or public health professionals or even psychologists would go to have an understanding of a phenomena that touches upon such units, because the process then involves selecting a small number of important cases that are likely to yield most useful and have greatest impact on the development of knowledge. So when one goes into that subset, which is a critical case, there is a question of developing new knowledge. It might be to expand, it might be to add on the knowledge that is known, or there is a gap that needs some answers. That's where you would find that the research would then take place. And the next one is intensity sampling. Now, with intensity sampling, the researcher would want information that is so rich in that case. They want to understand how a phenomena the phenomena's intensity is manifested. So it might be that they want to go, say, maybe and explore maybe soldiers who have come back and have suffered spinal cord. You want to understand maybe their experiences. So it's highly intense, where there is something that is sketchy about this sampling, where it's not only just the phenomena, but also the intensity of it. And expert sampling, some books or some journal articles would refer it to Criterion Sampling, where you find that the sample is selected because of a particular criteria that is predefined for rich data that is relevant to that research problem. This would be, I would give an example with a psychologist maybe who works with children, and then you find that we're not just saying a qualified a psychologist who works with children, but we go ahead and say those who specialize in autism. So that would be an expert sampling, because we want those specific nitty-gritties, those specific characteristics. And this still forms a part of purposive sampling. It's just these are subtypes or forms that are under purposive sampling. Now, the next one, it's called key informant sampling. And now this involves where you find that the researcher then is looking for a specific personal skills or position within a society. These are people that you find, say, maybe, the traditional leaders in the society. Some are civic member leaders, and some would just not be, maybe they would be called Sanko leaders who have information about the community. They would provide valuable, rich information about whatever that it is that is being researched. So they provide a deeper insight and understanding and information, because they know what is going around, what is going on in that community. And there are particular characteristics that needs to be taken into consideration when we talk about key informant sampling. And one is the key informant's role in the community. So this person must obviously be somebody who's very knowledgeable about the community, what the community does, where they come from, how things started. If we are to talk into developments, they will tell you even the years when development started to come, and they will tell you where that community is in terms of processes and aspects that is linked to your research. And the second characteristic would be the knowledge. So they should have full knowledge of that community for them to be key informants. And the third thing, they should be willing to partake in the research. And the fourth characteristics, they must be able to communicate, because this is where you would ask a lot of questions. They must be able to narrate in terms of what it is that the researcher would be asking. And then they must be unbiased, where they will be able to report, the good and the bad, because sometimes you find people who would only want to talk about the good things in the community and not really talk about the shortcomings. So these people who are key informants, when they've been selected, they should be able to not be biased, but talk about the good and the bad in the community and be able to just link everything. And now the next type is total sampling, total population sampling. Now, this is a type of purposive sampling where the whole population of interest, it's a group of people who share similar characteristics, then would be studied. And many times when this happens, it's where you find that there is a small number of samples. So the total population, therefore, sometimes would be the one that is applicable, because if one tries to say they would do half, then they might not be able to reach. And remember that in as much as one would plan to do a particular number, sometimes you go into the community or you go wherever you're going, your setting or location for research, you find some people will just not consent to be involved in the research. So that is why it's always important to also look at how many people am I talking about, how many people are available, and that is very helpful. The next type, which is the last one, it's stratified purposeful sampling. Now with this one, it takes characteristics of a stratified sampling in quantitative, but there is a difference, because here the purpose is not to generalize and have a representative sample, but it's to make sure that the population is representative of those the areas. It's a strategy where you find that it takes the subgroups that are of interest and facilitate a process where one can even be able to compare, but it's not statistics linked, because there is a very limited number with a stratified purposeful sampling under purposive sampling. So now it illustrates characteristics of a particular subgroup of interest and facilitates comparison. So the technique is not, as I've said, it's not representative of the quantitative one. It's just similar in that it would look into specific subgroups and stratify it. So those are the sub types under purposive sampling that one would decide. So now, as I just go through them, when one is doing research, you must then be able to tell which form are you really picking, because it's important to know where you are going when you do when you go for sampling. Now, the second major type is convenient, or what we call accidental sampling. And this is convenient because, you know, one would volunteer themselves. It defines individuals who are believed to be representative of the population from which they are selected. So people choose to partake because they are close, because they can be reachable, because they are available. I mean, one could be doing a research about, you know, services in a clinic setting, and the researcher would just go and sit somewhere, and any patient who's willing to participate, they will come into the clinic. So it's not like the researcher has efforts to say, I'm picking this, I'm picking that. Anyone who comes into the clinic can come and be interviewed for this particular kind of sampling. It basically does have some advantages and disadvantages, as they all are having advantages and disadvantages. And now with convenience or accidental sampling, the advantage is it saves time and money and effort, because the researcher does not have to, you know, go into length according to who is the prospective participant. They just go and sit there, and anyone who's available would come for the interview. But research has repeatedly, you know, discouraged it, because it's the least rigorous technique, where research shows that it might lack quality and intellectual credibility, because people will just come. So the population is not somewhat controlled. You just get whosoever is willing. So the disadvantage is the rigorous part of it. Although it saves time and efforts, it has been short by you know, the shortcoming would be the rigorousness of it. Now, the next major type of sampling under qualitative sampling is snowball sampling. And this is also known as chain referral sampling, where you find that the researcher would use one person of contact whom they know fits the criteria, and then the one person that they know would refer them to the second person, the third person, the fourth person would have 3 people, maybe the fifth person has 6 people. So it's sort of like a referral, where the researcher would know other who are of the same, who share same characteristics, who share similar characteristics, who can be contacted. So it's from a one person who's known, and then the person would link to many others who can be potential participants. Now, the researcher obviously initial contact the few potential respondents, and he or she, the researcher, would then ask if they know anyone who shares the similar characteristics. And those could be, you know, when you're looking for people who are vegetarian, they are more likely in a community, in a small community, they are able to know, oh, so and so is a vegetarian, you can go and contact them. And these people share common characteristics, like cyclists. If one is doing a research on cyclists, they can just go know one and then be referred to others by, you know, the virtue that when they go cycling, they know each other. And then it could be, you know, people with a particular disability. When you find one, locate one, and the other will locate others, or they will tell you they know others, because obviously they might go to training together or some treatments together, or sometimes they share dates or follow-ups with the hospital and all that. So snowball sampling you get one and then they refer you to many others who share the same characteristics. And this obviously is dependent upon what the researcher is looking into, or the research question. Now, the last major one, which is the fourth one, is quota sampling. And quota sampling is different because then the researchers decide while designing the study how many people with which characteristics to be included as prospective participants. And it's more specific with respect to size and proportions of samples. This is in a sense that if maybe it's a village and say maybe we're looking into a community that has 4 villages. If it has 4 villages, with quota sampling, you would want to have the 4 villages well represented. And if it means maybe you want to also do quota sampling and do the gender as an interest, as a variable of interest, that would mean you will have to have equal numbers as well from the 4 villages. So you don't just go and say first come, first serve of those who are volunteering to participate after you have after you have screened for potential participants. No, the researcher will then have to check to make sure that in village A, if we are having 10, it's 5 females and 5 males. In village B, if we are having 10, 5 males, 5 females. Village 3 and 4 as well. So it's about, being specific according to sizes and proportions of that sample or subgroups. And when it's chosen, the proportion must correspond for the total population. So the characteristics, as I've said, it might be age, it might be place of residence, it might be gender, it might be class, profession, it might be marital status, or maybe the use of a particular contraceptive method, or HIV status, etc., etc. So the researcher basically would sit back, design the study in terms of how many people would be characterized in a particular study, after which then they must be specific about the proportions that would correspond to a larger population. After which then they divide to say, okay, in space A, in space B, in space C, this is how many we are taking, and this is how much these are the elements or the characteristics that we are looking for, and make sure that everything is equal. And that is quota sampling for you. Just before I get to, the population and sampling, I would like to ask if there's any comment, Ms. Peters, before I continue, just for me to also have a glass of water.
So there is one question. The student is asking if you must explain the reasons why the specific purposive sampling is being used.
So it is important, it's very important to explain why a specific a type is used, because when one reads, it clarifies. And this also helps the reader in terms of what were your, it also links up with your exclusion and inclusion criteria. So you want to be specific because you want to show your supervisor or whosoever is to read to say, this was very intentional. So the intent, being intentional about your sampling also tells a lot in terms of your research questions, the objectives that you're hoping to achieve, and also the purpose overall. Because remember that with research, when we talk about rigor, we are saying, did you follow all scientific steps to ensure that this is rigorous enough to be a scientifically valuable? So one thing that you want to do if you are a student or if you are doing your PhD, when you do this selection, when you go to your approach, when you go to your design, when you go to your sampling, be very intentional. And how do you showcase that you are intentional about the sample that you are choosing? It's when you are specific into those details to show case that you understand what you're looking for, and it's not by virtue of just a coincidence. So it's very important to rationalize why such specific form, because you want the reader to also follow why that. And if you look at articles, they usually would outline, what are the advantages of each sampling type or form. They usually would go into details in terms of why is it important to choose this one over that one. And that also gives weight to your work to say, when you chose that particular sampling type and form and subtype, you were very intentional. And that also showcases the rigorousness of your scientific paper or writing per se. Any other question? I'm not sure if I was able to address the person. Any other question, Ms. Peters?
Dr. Maphula, you gave a very excellent answer. There are no other questions at this point in time, but we may request, I see there's one more question. What is the difference between snowball sampling and key informant sampling in a case where other key informants were acquired through the first one? How does one present this? So I think the person is saying they're using a mixture of key informants with snowball sampling. So they're wondering, how would you present this information?
So remember that with snowball sampling, you know one person and then they will refer you to the other one. That is snowball sampling. So now key informant just speaks into your purpose. You are looking into people who would basically provide sufficient in-depth understanding into maybe a community phenomena. Usually, if say maybe you want to know about a particular culture, you would go into that community and would look into people who really have been leaders in that community, people who have resided there for a long time, people who have been there in the leadership. With communities, they have chieftaincy, they have a board, they have their own, board of directors in that, chieftaincy place. So those are the people you will definitely go and look into. You can call them key informants in that they are the host of the knowledge with regard to what went on prior to you coming with the research question that links up to the community. So it can be that you would do quota sampling where you are, but usually with quota sampling, you find that the keynote of it is your research question will guide if you are looking for, if you would have to look for your strategy, your technique should be quota sampling, or you would use purposive sampling, where you would specifically go to key informants.
Thank you so much for that answer. I think you hit the nail on the head. I just wanted to notify you that the participants in today's webinar are indicating that the presentation is really well formulated and that you're giving really good examples. So they are really appreciative of the examples and practical way in which you are presenting the information. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Ms. Peters. Just alert me when it's 10 minutes to go so I open the floor and I can go through my presentation and make sure that we are on time.
Okay, so we're at 1246 minutes.
All right. Thank you. So as I continue, now we talk into population and sampling characteristics. The reason why it's important to talk to population and sampling characteristics is because there is no way that you will have your sample without knowing where you are going to locate or your setting for such a sample. So population basically would speak into comprehensive group of individuals. It could be institutions, objects, having common characteristics that the researcher is looking into. And I must say that setting is very critical because you don't want to just say, I'm conducting my study at Buloberu because Buloberu, that's where I stay at. You can't do that. When you say this is my location, it's because when you read latest, it links up to the very first slide that I said. When you look at literature, when you look at gaps, what have been done, how much is done in that area of interest where you have a question, and where was it done? So when you do your population setting, this is where you are saying there is a gap in this particular area, and having to conduct this study will add more insight into the knowledge and into the knowledge gap, into the existing gap, especially in this area. So we don't choose setting because we stay next to them, or we know everyone in that village, so it will be easy to reach out to friends for them to, conduct interviews as quick as possible. So we don't choose setting according to our personal preference, but we do that having looked at literature and having seen the gap that exists, so that when we do that research, when we say we are going to this community, we know that information that is to come will add value into the research space, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel when a research has been done and everything has been done in that particular space. You redo the same thing, same method, same everything. It won't add anything new because it has been done. But that is why it is important to go to literature and search where lies the gap, where lies the gap in terms of where I am. Where can this research be done? And it adds knowledge and new knowledge into space, the space of research. And in as much as we talk about population, it is very important to note that with sample, we will talk about procedure, we'll talk about methods, their strategies, processes, and sizes. And this links up to, these characteristics that we look for, your age, your gender, ethnic group, depending on one's topic. If we are to talk into the procedure, we would say then, how will you then do your sampling? What are the strategies that you are going to employ? And normally in a setup where maybe it's a community setup, usually what I've realized, or from experience, you go there, you negotiate entry with the leaders, and then they call up a meeting of the whole community. Everybody comes, you explain your research in full, they understand. Those who are willing, if you're doing, depending on which sampling type you have chosen, then they would then enlist their names. And then from there, you decide the strategies that you would use to select those that are eligible. Rushing through now to process of recruiting participants. Number one, that is very important, is you need to have a clear criteria for screening your potential participants. So you need to know, and this links back to, what is your inclusion criteria? Who are your sample? And then you need to know the number to be recruited. And I've gone through various articles just to, to check what is the most relevant sample size in qualitative sampling. And different articles will bring different results, and it is all dependent upon your topic. If, say, maybe you are doing say maybe intensity sampling, where you find that or maybe you are doing critical case sampling, where there is just those very few people who qualify for that, depending on the criteria. You might not get 100 people. With some, you might get in as little as 5 people, and that would form your sample. And some, you find that 10 would be enough. So you need to have an idea. Also, the location is important, and the approach to be used, because in as much as you would say you want a sample, you must have a strategy in place in terms of how would you approach to go into that community to get the sample of your choice. If you are going maybe to a particular village, you are going to a particular city, how are you going to then enter and make sure that you get the sample that you're looking for? And over and above, we also have to factor in, COVID-19. I've seen in the past 2 years now, from 2020 last year and this year, that so many students had to, write the addendums where they are changing to say due to COVID-19 regulations, we're not going to be able to do face-to-face. We'll do telephonic interviews. You know, things have been changing. And this is important to consider for people who are writing now or people who are in the process to submit for ethical clearance, to say, consider COVID-19 regulations and make sure that you have factored that in. If it would mean you would change and say you would schedule according to this and that, do align those according to the COVID-19 regulations. And now, as I've spoken, in terms of the processes for recruiting, there is a need to know negotiation entry, where you go to the chief leader, you know, you go to the civic leaders, community leaders, and then they actually know how to get hold of people. And then one need to bear in mind, be respectful and responsive to the guidance. Sometimes I've had instances where we are told in that community they don't like people who wear trousers. We had to wear long dresses when we went there for collection of data, because you don't want to then, wear a trouser and then you want to go to a family where they really hate trousers. You will not be able to get the data that you're looking for. So if it means for that month of data collection, you have to wear long skirts, you do that. I've had instances where, you know, when US students meet up with university students with collaboration, and US students had to learn not to wear jeans that are tattered because the communities are very sensitive. We have had experiences where they had to, you know, even go to malls, buy dresses because they didn't have dresses, because we couldn't go with them if they are wearing tattered jeans. So be respectful and responsive to the guidance according to community leaders in order to access your sample, and establish good rapport, because it's important. And on entry, clear guidance must be developed, and the approach must be clear, be sensitive to social and cultural context, because remember that as an interviewer, you are a tool. When you do your qualitative data collection, you are actually a tool.
Excuse me, Dr.
Rush
Maphula.
through data.
5 minutes left, Dr. Maphula.
Just 2 more slides. Data saturation and sampling size, the point in which research process where no new information is discovered. So this is where you find that. So when you're collecting data, in as much as data is being collected, there is a need to look through what is coming up, the themes that are coming up. So it's done concurrently when you collecting data, also trying to analyze this data to see if no new information is surfacing, then that's where we say that is the level of data saturation. And that also speaks to then your sample size, because if no new information is coming, that means you have reached your full capacity for data collection. Inclusion and exclusion criteria. These are characteristics that the prospective subject must have or must not have if they are to be included or excluded in the study. And this might be, I've seen students, when we say inclusion and exclusion criteria, they usually would say, I'm including all females. And then in the exclusion criteria, they would say or everyone who's not a female. I mean, that is an obvious thing. It's not an exclusion. Exclusion is when the person is female, but there are certain things that would make sure that this person cannot be included. So that speaks into exclusion and inclusion criteria. The last one is when in the research process to decide about sampling. When the purpose is clear, when the objectives are clear in the beginning of it all, because in as much as you want to formulate your research idea, your research question, your research project, you make sure ethics are observed and adhered to, but at the same time, sampling is part of the plan. So you plan from the beginning of it. Thank you so much. And this brings us to the end. Thank you, Ms. Peters.
Dr. Maphula, can you perhaps share any of the references that you had used for this presentation? There are some students that are requesting for this additional information.
Yes, I will share all of them.
Okay.
I will share all of them in our DRM page.
No problem. And then there's some participants or some attendees that have indicated that in their own experience when they went into Setswana communities, that they had to wear long skirts and a headscarf and sit with their feet straight. So the cultural context within which we're doing research is really, really important to take note of. Even reflecting on my own research, when I did research at the Juvenile Youth Care Center, one has to be so careful of how we present ourselves to other people. So this presentation has been really on point and excellent, Dr. Maphula. Thank you so much for availing yourself to do this wonderful presentation. I think as research is improving, we need to keep updated and abreast of everything that is going on. There's a host of thank yous and excellent presentations coming through on the chat function. People are really appreciative and are really happy with the presentation. Yes, the presentation is currently being live streamed on Facebook. We will save the recording and put it on our YouTube channel. Please go onto Psychological Society of South Africa Division of Research and Methodology for more information. We have one hand. If there's a question, you may ask the question. I saw one hand. Does someone want to ask a question, please? Go ahead. Okay.
No, the hand is lowered. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. If you did want to ask a question, it would be very welcome. It is 2 minutes to 1. And I think that this presentation was really well attended, and there are many good positive comments and feedback. I don't see any additional questions in the Emmanuel. Please go ahead. I see you have a question.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you very much to our presenter, Dr. Maphula. It was quite an interesting and enlightening presentation. I just have a question, which perhaps it may be different because of specialities and different disciplines that we are in. Is it possible that methodology that a researcher adopts can also direct which sampling a researcher can prefer or choose to be suitable in a particular research project?
Come again, Mr. Emmanuel?
No, I'm saying, is it that there are different methodologies that one may use? Like in our case, one may use ethnography, case study, phenomenology. So you may find that such a particular methodology has got its own particular procedure that a student or a researcher can adopt in the process of collecting data. So perhaps is it possible to link a methodology with a particular sampling, or a methodology, can it link or direct a researcher to a particular sampling technique?
So basically, if we look at research is very connected in a sense that if you're doing, say maybe for example now, because we're talking about qualitative research, so we have different designs like the phenomenological research design that I've just indicated. And with phenomenological research design, you find that you want to tap into experiences, and that would mean that when you do sampling, you want to be very specific. That might be you would use purposive sampling because you are looking into specific characteristics, and you want these people to then outline their experiences, their personal encounters. So I do agree that with your method comes your design, comes your sampling. So it's very interlinked, because you cannot, research. It's like in our field, we have neuropsychology, where you know that if this is the case, that is the case. If your left hindbrain has been injured, this is what's going to happen. So the same goes for research in terms of your method. If you are using, say, maybe quantitative, if you are using qualitative, if you are using mixed methods, those will drive the designs that you are supposed to choose from, depending on your plan. Your research, in fact, your research question and your objectives are very key, the very key that determines what should happen. I'll give you an example where you're saying, say maybe you go and read a statement that says the impact of COVID-19 on children. Immediately, you must ask yourself, what research approach would be suitable for this? If you say qualitative, then that would mean, are we looking at this from the eyes of the children? Who's your sample? Are you looking at this to say the impact as perceived by their parents? Do you see? So already your topic or your research question is driving to say, what is it that should follow? What design are you going to follow? So I would say that the main key is understand your purpose, understand your objectives, because those would be key in terms of directing what is your end product. If we are saying you want to have a muffin, what are your ingredients to the muffin? So we ask ourselves, and that will actually drive us to the outcome. So your purpose must be very clear from the onset. Your objectives must be very clear, and that will help you to actually just refine your approach, you refine your design, your sampling strategies, your data analysis. They link up all together, because remember that this is very much scientific in as much as we would say. So your purpose and your objectives are key to determine what should happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer, Dr. Maphula. We also have Nali. Nali, may you please go ahead with whatever question it is that you have?
Thank you so much for the presentation and the platform. I just want you to repeat, Fatima, the platforms where we can be able to access more of your activities and presentations like this one. If you can write them on the chat as well.
On the chat box,
Yes,
I have indicated where you can find the information. I will retype it. I'm going to type it shorthand. CISA DRM is the YouTube channel. Psychological Society of South Africa, Division of Research and Methodology. We have a YouTube channel. We also have a Facebook page. You can find us on both of those channels. Thank you so much, Dr. Titi, for putting the link for the site, the Facebook webpage. And before you go, just give me a second. I would like to request if people could please answer a short evaluation of this webinar. It would be excellent. Copy. Just give me 1 second to paste the link into the chat box. Paste, please, if you could complete the evaluation form for us. We are so excited to be presenting new webinars next year. In order to plan those, we would like you to complete the evaluation form. So thank you so much, Nelly. Dr. Maphula?
And the other thing, please like our page on Facebook, DRM, as she has indicated. Please look for it on the chat box and like our page if you can, please. We would appreciate. Thank you.
That brings us to the end of this wonderful presentation. Nelly, your hand is still up. Is there something else that you would like us to speak about?
No, it's the old one, sorry.
No problem.
Right.
Thank you everyone for being here. We will upload the presentation shortly. And thank you, Dr. Maphula, for this excellent presentation. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.